it's usually irrelevant for people. You shouldn't drive on Shabbos. If you're driving, you can't really drive to Phoenix on Saturday, according to that. Besides driving, you can't leave 3,000 feet. The truth is the car is probably a private domain, but it's complicated. Oftentimes when people, in the olden days, there were cities and there were woods around them, so you could go 3,000 feet, isn't that far? So how do you go further? So the rabbis introduced a concept called Eruv Techumin, which means basically you establish a place that you're going to spend Shabbos within that 3,000 feet, and then you can go 3,000 more. But there's special ways of establishing it. One way is putting food there when Shabbos starts. One way is being there when Shabbos starts. One way is, if there's a landmark, you could say, that is where I'm going to spend Shabbos, part of Shabbos. So they're very, very, very complex laws, and that's what we were studying the last few days. And this is the last day of the laws of Eruv Techumin. The next section is the laws of Yom Kippur. The laws of Yom Kippur. Yeah, just perfectly in time. Wow. Although the laws of Yom Kippur are only a couple chapters, that will be Rosh Hashanah, we probably won't get to studying it. Apparently there's 3 chapters, and then afterwards is the laws of Yom Tov, of like all the other holidays. Rosh Hashanah and not the laws of Rosh Hashanah like the shofar laws, but the laws of how to behave, how to rest on the holidays. Okay, you can't put 2 eruvs. So what we spoke about is we said you have 2 sides of the city, right? You have the border of the city, and you want to extend it so you can go more than 3,000 feet. So wherever you put that eruv, you can go further on Shabbos. But you cannot put 2 eruvs on 2 different sides of the city, so you extended the city space. This loophole the rabbis gave is only on one side. You can only put 1 eruv per Shabbos. Let's say you did 2 of them, or you told 2 people, hey, go make an eruv, and they both went in different directions. Then you can, mushka. Then you can go to those, you can use those eruvs. So even though you can't set it up, you're not supposed to, the rabbis don't punish you if you do. How can you go? One second, this is complicated. Okay, how far can you go on those 2 directions? You can only go until the place that they can reach. If one put the eruv at 2,000 amos on the east side, and the second one put it at 500 amos on the west side, you can only go 1,000 amos on the west side, that's how, that is how far. Okay, so like the person who went to the east side, and you can't go only 2,500 like the person on the west. Okay, so if you put 2 eruvs, you cannot go a full 2,000 amos by there. You look at them almost like you made it. Their sides equal to each other. So on one side you can go 2,500, and the other side you can go 1,000.
Penalized because it's the second.
Because you can't put an eruv, and therefore if you do 2 eruvs as once, one is 2,000 and one is 2,000, then you shouldn't go past those 2,000s. A person could make 2 eruvs and make a condition. Say, if something happens, a mitzvah happens, and I need to go in this direction, then, so we said also these eruvs are meant that if there's a mitzvah you need to do there, or a mitzvah you have to do right after Shabbos and you want to be further, then you make these eruvs. So now let's say you don't know, but you make 2 eruvs and you say, if I need to go in one of these directions, then I will rely on this eruv, and if this one, I'll rely on this eruv. So if you go in one, the other eruv doesn't count anymore. And if you need both, you can rely on any one. And if nothing happens and you don't need to go in, and none of the eruvs are an eruv, you can only do it if a mitzvah comes up. So I'll try and give an example. Like let's say you're an EMT. Let's say you're an EMT or something like that. And you want to be able to easily go and check on sick people, right? So if I need these eruvs, I'll be able to go that far. Just like
Can you use both eruvs? One on the east,
conditionally.
one on the
We
west?
said conditionally if a mitzvah opportunity comes up. So the rabbi said we'll make an exception. You can use the 2 eruvs for a mitzvah.
But if it's not a mitzvah,
Then they're not considered eruv. Yeah. Well, then you could say this is my eruv unless the mitzvah comes up.
Right.
Yeah. Just like you can't go on a Tchum on Shabbos, you cannot go on the holidays as well, and you cannot go on Yom Kippur as well. And just like you can't take out from a private domain to a public domain on Shabbos, Similarly, on Yom Kippur, you're also liable for punishment. However, holidays you can take out from one domain to another domain. So you can't take a sitter out of a house on Shabbos because you're going from private to public, but on holidays you could, and therefore you do Eruvin on Yom Kippur like Shabbos, and you do Eruv Techumen for holidays as well. So Yom Tiv doesn't need a Eruv because you can carry outside on the holidays. And the main time of Eruv, as we said, you have a shared courtyard, and you want to carry from your house to the courtyard. So on holidays you don't need an Eruv. On Yom Kippur you need an Eruv. But on all times, when you have Eruv Techumen, when you have going out of the Techum Shabbos to 3,000 feet, you need that for holidays as well if you want to go out. I gave an example, like now it is popular to go camping on Shabbos. You have to make sure you set these things up that you're not going to go too far or hiking or whatever it is. Holiday which falls next to Shabbos, whether before or after, like this year, right? Rosh Hashanah falls right after Shabbos as well as on Shabbos. So, or two holidays in exile, you should make two Eruvs for two directions, and you should you can rely on one Eruv for one day and one Eruv for a second day. Or you could make one Eruv and rely on it for both days. And on the second day, but if you can rely on it for one day, and on the second day you don't have Eruv. When do we say this? On the two holidays of exile. But the two days of Rosh Hashanah, they are like one day, and therefore so interestingly enough, a lot of people don't know, Rosh Hashanah is the only holiday that was 2 days in the temple in Jerusalem, right? It was the only holiday that was 2 days in the temple. All other holidays were 1 day in Israel and 2 days outside of Israel. Like 2 days of Sukkot in the beginning, 2 and then, 2 days of Pesach in the beginning, 2 days and then. 2 days of Shavuos. In Israel, it's 1 day of Shavuos. However, Rosh Hashanah is the only holiday which is 2 days in Israel, and that's how it was even in the temple times.
Really?
It is also the only holiday that that even a couple thousand years ago they didn't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah except in the temple, right? So I just want to say, like, people who only celebrate 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, and they say, oh well, it's the biblical way of doing it. It's incorrect. So the biblical is 1 day, but just the technicalities of Rosh Hashanah, the way Rosh Hashanah work is you have to give sacrifices on the day of Rosh Hashanah. So what happens is a lot of times people would come in and say there's a new moon on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and they would say, oh, it's time to give sacrifices, and it was too late. So the rabbis then, in the times of the temple, said Rosh Hashanah is 2 days, period. So Rosh Hashanah has been 2 days for thousands of years. So it's interesting to know. Now, what is the difference in Rosh Hashanah and other holidays? Rosh Hashanah, why is it indeed in Israel that Rosh Hashanah is 2 days? The reason is, actually it says in the Talmud, the 2 days are like 1 day. It's a different reason. In exile, outside of Israel, it's because you might not know when the first of the month was. And it takes 2 weeks to know approximately when the first of the month was. So in case you don't know when the first of the month was, it could be one of 2 days. The holidays, Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos, those are all 2 days. However, Rosh Hashanah, in the temple, it was always just a technicality that it needed to be 2 days, so it's considered like one long day. So the Eruv for 1 day can, however, you can only do an Eruv. You can't do an Eruv in one direction for 1 day and one direction for another day, like the other holidays in exile. You can only do one Eruv one direction Rosh Hashanah because it's considered 2 days, which are like one.
So you only need
1 Eruv Rosh Hashanah for both days, but only in one direction. You can't separate. You can't divide the days of Rosh Hashanah.
the reason you need 2 Arabs for 2 days is because it's being made with food and you have to consume it? Or?
No, it's just because the 2 days are separate days. You have to do it for each day.
Oh,
So when you cook the day before, you can't cook at all during the second day.
You can cook on holidays. You can cook on, like, you can't cook tomorrow because it's Shabbos, but you can cook on
Yom Tov.
on Sunday. The only thing about cooking on Sunday is you have to make sure that you don't start a flame. You can't turn on a flame. So what people usually do is either they leave on a flame, or what they'll do is they'll leave a yahrzeit candle, or and then they'll or they have some kind of pilot light, and then maybe they'll turn on the gas and light it from there, But you have to light from a pre-existing flame.
And you can light a yahrzeit candle without honoring your side?
Yeah, it's very common to light yahrzeit candles because for tomorrow night, people will light the Yom Tov candles on Saturday night, and you're not allowed to start a new fire. So what you do is you don't need a yahrzeit candle, but it's practical. If you have a gas stove, sometimes people will leave on a small the whole time, and they'll just take from there. Or people have a pilot in their heater or whatever it is, or people will light a yahrzeit candle. But it's very common in New York that people will come and say, hey, we don't have any fire, can we have some fire? You know, and they'll light a candle. And one trick I learned is that people light a cigarette from a candle, and that way it doesn't go out when you're walking outside, right? So if you have a cigarette, you light that cigarette, you can walk down the street with it, and then light from pre-existing flame. I remember I was once talking to someone on Shavuos, and he was a guy who was Jewish, and he was lighting a cigarette in New York. So I said, hey, don't light it. Give me your cigarette. So I took a cigarette, and someone was walking by, and I lit the cigarette with another cigarette. And I said, here, you're welcome, right? Because he didn't light on Yom Tov. So on Yom Tov, you can't light a fire, but what you could do is you can light from pre-existing flame.
An extended flame.
Yeah, so if people use yahrzeit candles, actually, probably there's more usage of yahrzeit candles for convenience than yahrzeits. Just put it out there. Yeah, everyone likes to have them because that way you have fire if you need it. Okay. Similarly, a person could say this Erev is for Shabbos, and this and not for another Shabbos, or this Erev is for another Shabbos, or this Erev is for all Shabbos and all holidays. A lot of them we're talking about, you put an Erev for a day and you didn't make any specification. A person could say to 5 people, I'm making an Erev for everyone once. If you want, you can go. If you don't want, don't go. Even though you want to after night, you can go. This is something that is rabbinical. You can make these conditions. And similarly, you can make for all the Shabbos of the year, and you say, if you want, you can use the Erev, not the whole year. If you make for 2 holidays in exile, 2 days of holidays in exile, or for Shabbos and Yom Tov, even though it's one Erev to one side for both days, it needs to be an Erev in a place which is accessible on the first night and the second night at twilight. What do? You go on Erev Yom Tov, on Erev Shabbos, and then you take it there, and if it's the night of holiday, and then you take it with you and you bring it the night of holiday the next day, and you eat it there. If it's Shabbos, or you brought it on the night of the holiday because they're 2 holiness and they're not like one day. Okay, so we're going to stop here, but basically there's different qualifications. The easiest way to make an Erev is you make it conditionally for all time, but there's different qualifications for when, Shabbos and holidays and stuff like that, they're considered 2 days, and if you do it one day, it doesn't automatically accept the second day. Okay, so let's finish this off. Yeah, so Rosh Hashanah, a lot of people don't know. Practically speaking, according to ancient Jewish tradition, if you hear the shofar at night of Rosh Hashanah, which some places blow it tonight, there's no significance to shofar at all at night.
You're not fulfilling a mitzvah.
You're not fulfilling a mitzvah. If you blow it tomorrow, you're also not fulfilling a mitzvah. It's not shofar. It's like blowing it on Tuesday. There was somebody here, and he said at his church, they blow it. Just these couple pages. At his church, they blow it tomorrow. Should he tell them not to blow it? And I said, no, there's no problem for them to blow it tomorrow, right? Because they're not commanded to do it. It's not a mitzvah.
They're not Jewish.
They're not Jewish. So there's another interesting thing to note, is the second day of Rosh Hashanah lost popularity in America. Yeah. I always have a really hard time getting a minyan the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Hopefully this will be a little easier, but the second day of Rosh Hashanah is very unpopular in America. And there are people who are hardcore, come every Shabbos, but the second day of Rosh Hashanah, I don't do that. It's interesting, first of all, to note that the way God set it up, this year, we blow the shofar only on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. In other words, it's like almost like sticking it. No, there is a second day, But it's also interesting to note that it's the only second. A lot of the holidays, people in America got lazy, and they said, oh, we do it like Israel. In Israel, they do one day, we do one day here. Rosh Hashanah is the exception. Even in Israel, even in the times of the temple, they kept it for 2 days. There was an era that it was kept for 1 day many, many years ago, but even in the temple in Jerusalem, they kept it for 2 days. So that's just an interesting thing that I always point out. Okay, so let's finish up. Where you don't have it, Paul? Do you have it? Is it? Yeah, it's that one. Okay, so this is what we said.
Are you on 19 here?
Yeah, I'm on 19. Maybe I'm in 18. Let's see. Okay. You know, we are actually a little bit earlier. Let me just, I kind of mixed the pages here, but I have it right here. Okay, so this is what we explained last week. Last week got quite deep. Do you remember?
Mhm.
What we said we said that the reason why we don't blow shofar on Shabbos is if we blow shofar on Shabbos, it'll actually be insulting a little bit. It's a little insulting because if we blow shofar on Shabbos, we're basically making a statement that we're saying that Shabbos is the day where God tells us He's resting. His presence is not working on the world. His presence is transcendent. And so we also act transcendent on Shabbos. And if we announce that God is king over the world on Shabbos, really the question is there's no world on Shabbos. Shabbos, everything, you're not supposed to think about the world on Shabbos. You're supposed to think about God on Shabbos. So we said that's why Rosh Hashanah, which falls out on Shabbos, it's actually a greater announcement of God being king through Shabbos. So then we said, then why do they do it in the temple? Why do they do it in the Mikdash? So we explained that, we said, according to that, we have to understand why do they do it in the temple? So we explained that the world is made with God's finite energy. The finite energy comes from God's infinite energy. God chooses to be finite. He chooses to give life to everything. He chooses to create physical things. He chooses to create limited things. Is God limited to those things? No, absolutely not. God has no rules. He can change every rule any second, right? He has no rules. During the week, He tells us to focus on the rules of the world a little bit. Obviously, a Jew has to keep the mitzvahs and everything, also be higher during the week, but our job is to be in the world. Focus on Judaism in the world. Focus on godly energy in the world. We said on Shabbos, that's when we take off our gloves, we leave the worldly energy, and we go into more of a godly energy, right? We go into more godly, transcendent energy, and we focus how God is beyond the world. Money doesn't matter on Shabbos. Health doesn't matter on Shabbos. We're not supposed to worry on Shabbos. We don't pray about our needs on Shabbos, right? So, we said that when it comes to there's the energy of Shabbos is there to remind us that the world isn't really the way we see it. Really, God is not limited in the world. Could you imagine if we didn't have Shabbos, we just continue working, continue going, you know? So we said the energy on Shabbos, which is higher than the world, has a relationship with the world, right? It has a relationship with the world. It's connected to the world. It's higher than the world in a way that it's connected. So we said, for example, when you're describing a really, deep intellectual concept, you can't say it's so intellectual you can't touch it with your hands, right? We said that Shabbos has a relationship to the world. It's rest from work, right? So it has a relationship. And therefore, in that perspective, in that level of godly transcendence, which is out of this world, it's not fully out of this world. It still has a relationship to the world, right? It's the seventh day after 6 days. Without the 6 days, you don't have Shabbos, right?
Well, it is a worldly holiday, a worldly day.
So it's a worldly day which represents being higher than the world. So on one hand, Shabbos is beyond the world. On the other hand, it's beyond the world and about making a statement in the world, right? It's holiness makes a statement in the world. So therefore we said on Shabbos, you can't blow shofar because Shabbos, it doesn't not, so to speak, the concept of Shabbos doesn't care about the weekdays as a Jewish person. It's showing the weekdays what we really are, who God really is. And therefore, if we'll blow shofar on Shabbos and act like a weekday, that's an insult to Shabbos. We said, however, in the temple in Jerusalem, the holiness is so strong. It's beyond the world. That's the holiest place in the world. The holiness is so strong. And therefore, there's no concept of world in the Mikdash. There's just us and God. Oneness with God.
I'm sorry, go on.
And that's why we blow the shofar there, because when we don't blow a shofar on Shabbos, we're making a statement. We're saying, we already know God is the king of the universe. But in the temple in Jerusalem, it's like, it's just us and God. It's disconnected from the world. And that's why the rabbis were worried we'll break Shabbos if we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, right? Because in our regular Shabbos, we're worried. Maybe we'll break Shabbos. Maybe we'll consider it like a weekday. In the temple in Jerusalem, when you're there, there's no self-identity. There's no weekdays. It's just God. It's just so we brought a concept. We said this is like the Rebbe quoted. He said it's like we bow down automatically. We blow shofar automatically. There's no calculation. Should I blow shofar? Should I not blow shofar? There's no calculation. We blow shofar automatically. We have no identity. So we said in the parable, we said you have somebody who is standing in front of the king and has to bow down to the king, right? Then you have somebody who don't move when you're in front of the king, right? Don't move when you're in front of the king. That's an insult if you'll bow down, right? Because he's talking now. Listen to him, right? Now you have something even higher, the concept of you're in front of the king and the king wants you to bow down right now. Don't think about your own identity if you need to identify as a servant to the king or not. Think about how it happens automatically. So that's where we finished off. Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
part of the argument or the explanation for not blowing the shofar on Shabbos when they're outside the temple is that there's a redundancy. It's already an extremely holy day, and you're trying to make it more holy by, didn't we?
Yes.
So it seems to, isn't that same thinking applicable in the temple? I mean, you are in the holiest day, in the holiest place, and you're blowing a shofar. So it seems as if there's a redundancy there.
So here's what we're saying. When it comes to shofar, what do the rabbis say? They say we're worried you're going to carry your shofar outside, right? If we're worried you're going to carry your shofar outside, you're going to break Shabbos, which Shabbos accomplishes the same thing as shofar. You're going to break Shabbos with your shofar, right? So now, in the temple in Jerusalem, what we said way in the beginning of this is we said there are levels, deeper level. In the shofar in the temple is a deeper level of shofar. The shofar takes a different context there. When you're outside of the temple and your Shabbos is your state of holiness, then the shofar outside of the temple is a redundancy. It's equal to Shabbos. But in the temple, the shofar is a deeper level of shofar. It's a deeper level of arousing God. And what deeper level is it, we said? We said because you're in the temple and you're in such a holy place and you're doing it like automatically to fulfill God's commandment, you're actually accessing and actually, like let's say if we had the temple today and it's sat, we don't have the blowing of the shofar in the temple today. If we had the temple today, we wouldn't blow the shofar here, but they would be blowing the shofar and manifesting a greater level of relationship with God in the world, because that's the job of the temple, which we don't have today. We don't have people who can blow the shofar in the temple. So in the temple, the shofar takes a deeper manifestation of arousing God, a relationship with God. So let me put it, let's say, in the parable way. It's like, let's say you have a guy who's, so we're all standing in front of the king and we're not moving. And if we move, it's an insult. Then you have a servant of the king, the closest servant to the king, who's going and talking, directing people around, right? Who's closer to the king? The people who aren't moving, they're not moving. They're standing at attention. Or the guy who's moving people around, serving the king there. Who's closer to the king? Who has less of an identity? The servant. The people who aren't moving and standing at attention, they have an identity and they are kind of crushing it. They have an identity and they're standing stiff. Let's say you would come and you'd see the servant moving around, walk around and say, hey, he gets to walk around in front of the king with no death penalty. Why don't I get to? The answer is because he's already with the king. He's already the king. He doesn't have identity in the first place. He never had an identity. So it's the same thing. When we're out of the temple and we're in the world, we have to keep Shabbos to remind ourselves that God is in charge of the world, right? That Shabbos is the greatest reminder that God's in charge of the world. And we don't blow shofar because that will take away from our Shabbos. But when we're with the king, right? When we're with the king, the servant serving the king in the temple, why is he sweeping the floor? He's not sweeping the floor because that's his job or that's his identity. He's sweeping the floor because the king told him. That's what the king wants. That's what the king wanted in the first place. He hired him for that. So the temple, what we're saying is like in the relationship of the servant and the king, the servant's in the king's house, that servant has a whole different way of relating to the king. When he blows shofar, he's not blowing it like us out here. He has a whole different way of relating to the king. He's in the king's palace always. He speaks to the king, right? He has a whole different way of relating than the people who are newcomers, who go and they honor the king once a week.
It's almost like ritual. If you observe fastidiously all the steps of ritual, it can almost take you away. I know most people, ritual, it makes more concrete your allegiance to God. But with some people, it's almost a distraction if they're so immersed in God to begin with.
Well, when you watch the videos of the Rebbe handing out dollars, there was a man and a lady there, and they would basically push people by. I mean, there were thousands of people every Sunday. Basically, push people, right? Like push, keep moving the line, and grab people. So you might say, what a terrible thing, grabbing someone in front of the Rebbe, pushing someone in front of the Rebbe. It's like, no. They work for the Rebbe. In other words, the only reason they're doing it is so the Rebbe could bless every person that day. In other words, their relationship. So let's say you would go in front of the Rebbe and push somebody. It wouldn't be good, right? It wouldn't be good because you have an identity mixed into it. You're on a lower level. You're standing in front of the Rebbe. You have to be in total concentration. This person here, he is arranging the Rebbe's blessings to every person. Now he's part of the people there who are doing it. So shofar in the temple in Jerusalem is like, now that we're with God and there's no world and we're servants of God and we're standing with God himself in near the Holy of Holies, what does God want us to do? What does God want us to do? He wants us to blow the shofar.
I'd like to.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
This will be quick. I like what you're talking about with the Rebbe because I'm trying to imagine somebody who is so enmeshed and so loyal to the Rebbe that he has almost no independent thinking. My whole job is to just bring people to the Rebbe, and he's not even thinking about that. It's almost automatically like
Correct.
dance almost.
So it's like if you're working with the king always, and you're in the king's palace, and you're working with the king, then you can ask the king, "What do you want me to do?" But if you're not always, well, correct, he'll get you to do it.
You'll know.
But if you're not in the king's palace, if you're not in the king, and you'll do whatever's good for the king, whatever he wants. But if you're not usually in the king's palace, then when you go there on Shabbos, when you go to the outskirts of the palace, you stand at attention. That's the job. That's what the Torah is telling us. Yeah, Paul, you get it? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand. I mean, we discussed this parable last week. And in terms of the parable, I do understand it, that in the presence of the king or in the presence of God, you are being directed to do something. So it seems to me a much simpler explanation would be we know God dwelled within the Beis HaMikdash, right? He's there. So when you're in the presence of God on Rosh Hashanah, on Shabbos, God wants you to blow the shofar. Why do we need all of this other I don't want to be pejorative, but why do we need a more explanation for it than to say that's what God wants?
So this is how we lead it in. This is how we let into it. We let in is, first of all, the rabbis were the ones who decided that no more blowing the shofar outside of the temple and blowing shofar in the temple. That's number one. The rabbis decided. And they said, we're worried that you'll break Shabbos outside the temple. We're not worried you'll break Shabbos in the temple. Now, what our discussion was here is how could you not have shofar on Rosh Hashanah? That was our question. How could you not have the central idea of Rosh Hashanah? So we explained that the truth is when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, you're not lacking the shofar. On the contrary, it's even a holier shofar on Shabbos when you don't blow it. It's even holier than regular years when you do blow it.
But it's,
So that's what we said. So then we explained in detail how Shabbos is actually holier. And not blowing the shofar is holier than blowing the shofar. So then we said, if Shabbos is holier, right? If Shabbos is holier and not blowing the shofar is holier, how come in the temple they didn't want to do that holier thing? That's what we asked. So we had to understand in what way is it holier on Shabbos outside the temple, And what way do we blowing the shofar holier on the temple in Shabbos? We didn't want to just say, that's the temple, that's what God wants. Because again, the rabbis are the ones who said this. We wanted to understand inside of them the different aspects of holiness of being in the temple and being out the temple. And by understanding the different aspects, we can understand the context, how there's shofar regular year, shofar on Shabbos, and then there's shofar in the temple on Shabbos. And that,
It seems like we're making, and I don't mean to extend this discussion unnecessarily, but it does seem to me that we're making a dual argument in both cases. That when we're outside the temple, we don't want to carry. But then, even if carrying wasn't a prohibition, we wouldn't do it on Shabbos for the second reason. So then, are there two reasons for not, let's say, I want to separate the temple.
So what we're
from-
doing actually is we're actually showing how the reason of carrying, and we asked a bunch of questions. We said, just because some people make a mistake, what about the big rabbis? Or why don't we do something, have it only in the synagogue, or make rules about it, right? So what we're doing is we're actually reading into what the rabbis are saying. And we're reading in that the rabbis, when they say you can't blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah because you might carry, they're not just saying a rule, you might carry, therefore not blow shofar. They're saying that shofar outside the temple on Shabbos is technically going to be against Shabbos. It's going to fight against Shabbos. So the rabbis are actually, there's the external reason, but really if you read in, there's a deeper internal reason, and the implication of the internal reason is that not blowing shofar on Shabbos is not because we are not capable or because a superficial reason, but it actually has this deep insight about Shabbos and about shofar. So what we're doing is, in this talk here, is we're going into the reasoning, the deeper insight in the rabbis and the Talmud. So are there two reasons or one reason? There's really one reason. There's one reason we don't blow shofar on Shabbos. And one reason why we do it in the temple. And the rabbis in the Talmud are expressing the legal aspect of it, but we're delving deeper into the legal aspect and understanding where the legal aspect fits in to the idea of Shabbos.
It still bothers me that we're giving two reasons for not doing it.
But do you understand how they're one?
No.
All right.
I-
So really
Wait,
what we're
wait,
saying is they're one reason.
Wait, 1 second. The prohibition on carrying, I mean, we all know you could have a shofar in your home, and that is your domain, and you could go home on Rosh Hashanah,
Correct.
on Shabbos, and blow your shofar,
Correct.
and you would never carry. So the carrying, there's this expression, building a fence around the Torah, right? That's what it is.
Correct.
It's to prevent you. So we make a rule, we don't blow on Shabbos, so that we won't be tempted to carry.
You won't
But-
accidentally carry, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And then, secondly, we don't blow, even if we had a chauffeur in shul, and it was not good, no danger of being carried, we wouldn't blow, because to use an expression which is, I don't intend to be pejorative, but it would be like gilding the lily. That we would be doing something that is redundant, because Shabbat is itself important enough in its own right that we don't need to blow a shofar on Shabbos. So we have,
But do you understand how those two reasons are actually
No,
one?
I don't understand.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to explain. Really, what the Sikha is building here is explaining, so this is what the rabbis say. They say, Hakol, it's not enough to say there's a shofar in shul, because it says, Hakol chayavin, every Jew is obligated to hear the shofar, whether you make it to shul or not, and not everyone's an expert. So, we're worried that some guy is going to bring the shofar, carry a shofar, right? So our question was, how could the rabbis take away this mitzvah, right? That was our question in the beginning of the talk. How could they take away such an important mitzvah? Because we're worried about some people, right? That was our question. So what we explained is really the rabbis are saying something totally deeper. They're really saying one reason. They're saying, what does it mean that you might carry it on Shabbos? It means the shofar itself, right? So the rabbis say you might carry it, right? So let's say, hey, mommy, it's just mommy, can you whisper? let's say, um, let's say, um, I wouldn't carry the shofar tomorrow, and I blow the shofar tomorrow. Would I do a mitzvah tomorrow?
No.
Nope. What do you mean? I didn't carry it. The Torah says to blow the shofar. I didn't carry it. The whole reason the rabbis didn't want me to carry it is because didn't want me to blow it because I might carry it. I didn't carry it. Did I do the mitzvah? Right?
I think what Paul is saying, and I agree with him, it's a distraction. That's not even a reason.
Wait, listen.
That's not even a reason. The reason is the mental and spiritual state of the people who are observing Rosh Hashanah.
Wait, just a little, wait for a second. So now, why isn't it a mitzvah for me to blow the shofar tomorrow if I don't carry it, right? The rabbis say it's not a mitzvah anymore. You're forbidden to it. If you blow the shofar tomorrow, from Shabbos' perspective, it's actually a sin.
Right.
It's a sin to blow the shofar, right? So, the rabbis didn't say, hey, be careful not to carry it. They said it is now forbidden because you might carry it. What does it mean, the term you might carry it, and why is it forbidden?
Okay, you have another definition of carry.
Oh, well, so they're just creating a hook.
The
They're
ra-
just saying,
No, the rabbis are saying the idea of blowing the shofar doesn't fit with Shabbos, so it's forbidden, right?
but then carrying is no longer the rationale.
1 second. You might carry is the rationale that it is forbidden. The rabbis don't say, hey, be careful, right? Be careful, and if you blow the shofar, it's still a mitzvah. The rabbis are saying, because the shofar might go against Shabbos, that is symbolic that the shofar is against Shabbos. The shofar is not necessary on Shabbos. The shofar is, what we said here, we said the shofar is not redundant, right? We said the shofar is insulting. That's what we said. So this is
I hear you.
This is the nuance of how the rabbis make a gezerah.
Okay.
So if somebody blows a shofar tomorrow,
You
is
could have
there...
made a gezerah, added, as we do with lots of things, added lots of rules that would prevent you from carrying.
Correct.
For example, they could make sure there's a chain on the shofar, tie it to the.
Correct. Well, so
You could have added.
when the
1,000
rabbis,
years added
so
rules.
So here's what
so,
bothers
so now at the beginning of the sikha, that's the basis of the question. The basis of the question is wow, that's extreme for the rabbis to say it's a sin to blow shofar on Shabbos because someone might carry it. So what are we explaining? We're explaining now that when they're saying they might be carried, might end up breaking Shabbos, and therefore it's totally forbidden, right? What they're saying is the concept of shofar goes against Shabbos. This is something which is important to understand. In Jewish law, Shabbos is black and white. When you're starting to keep Shabbos, there's loopholes here and there. This is rabbinic, biblical. But in the Rambam and everything like that, Shabbos is black and white. A rabbinic decree on Shabbos is just as strict as a biblical decree. That's the nature of Shabbos. Yeah.
Okay, I understand what you're saying now. It still sounds like just a rationale. The latter is a rationale for the former, in the sense that by elevating the prohibition of carrying to be a prohibition of blowing means you have an enforcement mechanism for the former. That is, there is if it's prohibited, forbidden to blow on Shabbos, and the temple is out of it. We're not talking about that. So then there's absolutely no reason to carry, because you wouldn't, as we said, if you blow, you're not performing a mitzvah. So they have, the rabbis subtracted the mitzvah from the act by saying, well, this isn't just it's a means to an end. And that's a little troubling to me in the sense that now carrying isn't, they've elevated the transgression to being, the transgression is no longer carrying. The transgression is blowing. That's what you're saying. And that, it just seems to me, I mean, I understand the logic behind it, but it's like the rabbis are saying, you know what? it's not enough to prohibit the blowing because of carrying. We know people are gonna violate that prohibition. Therefore, we're gonna outlaw blowing altogether. And just simply say, you can't blow it on Shabbos for its own sake.
Well, so again, there's two things here.
But
What we're doing here is we're reading into the rabbi's words. The rabbis are not like, in other words, the rabbis are saying the reason why you don't blow the shofar is because you might break Shabbos with it. And what we're doing here,
But that's where it began. It
So-
began with carrying.
correct, it began with carrying. So what we're doing here is we're showing that the rabbis are saying something much deeper than we thought.
Then why didn't they make that rationale to begin with?
Because that is the realm of Jewish law. We're studying we're studying the Chassidus, we're studying the spiritual side to it. Basically, in this talk here, we're saying there's Jewish law of the shofar, right? But what about the spiritual qualities of the shofar? That's what we're talking about here. They're in the Talmud. They're not talking about the spiritual qualities of the shofar. They don't talk about spiritual qualities of things. That's the realm of Jewish law. But behind every nuance in Jewish law, there are the spiritual qualities. If you look in this talk here, our whole question is okay, we understand this is a legality in shofar, but how could we lose out on the spiritual qualities of it? So what we explained is every nuance they said is actually amplifying the spiritual qualities
So
behind it.
without Chassidus, it would stop with carrying.
In Jewish law, it does stop with carrying. In other words, if someone
So
says,
there'd be no reason not to blow on Shabbos.
well,
Every shul could simply have a shofar in
Correct.
shul. It could be kept with the Torah.
So, that's what we're doing here. We're taking the Jewish law and we're saying, wait a second, shofar doesn't only have a legal aspect to it, it has a spiritual side. How does this Jewish law fit with the spiritual side? Because it has to fit with the spiritual side. Because, they're both parts of Torah. And that's what the Sikha is exploring here. It's saying that the rabbis are not only saying something separate than the spiritual side, but nuanced in their words, it's expressing the spiritual meaning of shofar.
So the thing that is like the burr under the saddle of this particular thing is, it's a cause and effect kind of thing. The cause of the spiritual argument is the effect of the carrying. In other words, we're using, the second follows from the first, that it wasn't originally argued that we shouldn't blow on Shabbos. It was the origin of the prohibition was not spiritual.
So that's what we're saying here is within the rabbi's word. We know the spiritual concepts of the shofar since the time of creation, right? Since the time of the first blowing of the shofar, and since the time of creation. We know about the ram that was created at the sixth day of creation, which has the two shofars of the giving of Torah, right? We know the spiritual concept of shofar, and we know the legality in the Talmud of shofar. So actually what we're doing here is we're saying, how do they fit together? And what we're showing is not only do they both happen, are they both significant, but actually nuanced in the rabbi's words, they're actually saying a deeper spiritual thing. It actually fits in with each other, that there's the spiritual concept of shofar, which will break Shabbos if it's blown on Shabbos. So the rabbis aren't, you see, in Judaism, we don't say, hey, spiritually the shofar is not good, we don't blow it. Because we don't make spiritual decisions. We follow Jewish law, right? But spirituality and Jewish law have to fit together.
But the rabbis just, okay.
So what the Rebbe
I'll
is
let it
doing
go.
here, is he's actually digging into the law. He's questioning the law and the spiritual concept. They seem to contradict each other. And then what he's answering is no, not only do they not contradict each other, but actually if you reread the Talmud there, you see the Talmud is actually saying that there's a spiritual concept on shofar, a spiritual concept of Shabbos, that it would be wrong to blow the shofar on.
You've got two spiritual concepts. The spiritual concept of the shofar and the spiritual concept of Shabbat.
Yeah.
And there are going to be times when two spiritual conflicts conflict.
Correct.
So they have to make a decision, how do we resolve
Yeah.
this conflict? And this is what they chose to do.
Correct.
To resolve the conflict.
Correct. Well, so this is a very deep concept, but it's actually, the more I read the Talmud, the rabbis, if you read into their words, you see there's much more than just the legality of it.
Does the word carry in English can mean carry something in your mind or physically carry? Is it the same for Hebrew or not?
Here it says, this is what it says. It says, not everyone is obligated to hear the shofar, and not everyone knows how to do it. This is another thing that people don't know. If you hear someone who blows the shofar amazingly, but they are unfamiliar with the nuances in Jewish law, it's not shofar. They didn't blow the shofar.
What do you mean nuances?
They blew it, they did a great job, they made all the sounds, but if they're not familiar with all the details, there's a lot of details. You do this wrong, it's just not the shofar. So now, it says everyone needs to hear the shofar, but not everybody is an expert in all the Jewish laws. This is back then in the times of the temple. So what we're worried is Shemer Yavirenu Dalet Amis. Maybe someone they'll pass their shofar over 4 cubits in the public domain, and they'll break Shabbos. That's what the rabbis are worried about. So what we're digging in deeper is we're showing how the rabbis are taking the fact that shofar can break Shabbos and showing how there's something greater about Shabbos that shofar already has, because the fact, and what we're doing is we're tying that in with all the other midrashim and all the other concepts of shofar, how lofty and important shofar is. Because in the Talmud, in the Jewish law, it doesn't say how important the shofar is, because that's Jewish law. It says this is how you blow it, this is how you make it, this is how you clean it, this is what you can't clean it like this, you can't do it that animal, you can do it with that animal, it has to be this long. That's what Jewish law is doing. And this is actually the Rebbe's style a lot. You have these two compartments which seem so they seem like they're contradicting each other, and the Rebbe is showing how not only are they not contradicting each other, but if you really dig into what the rabbis are saying, they're actually expressing this concept. So we go through and we explain how Shabbos doesn't need shofar, right? And that's why it comes out, the laws work out like this. That's why, the reason why God created the ability to break Shabbos with the shofar is because shofar and Shabbos don't fully get along. And then then the Rebbe said, well, if Shabbos without shofar is so great, then who needs a shofar in the temple? So the Rebbe says, oh, the temple shofar, that's out of this world. The Shabbos and shofar, Shabbos is in this world, right outside of this world. The temple shofar is out of this world. And so that's the explanation we're giving here.
So one more.
Yeah, one more question, and then I want to finish it. So, what's the last question?
So the Rebbe is applying a spiritual interpretation to the Jewish law.
Yeah.
Right. So would the spiritual, the Hasidus dimension be sufficient in and of itself to not blow the shofar if the prohibition for carrying did not exist?
So the rabbis who are talking in the realm of Jewish law,
I
right?
understand that.
So would that be sufficient? It depends. You see, the Torah is all one, all the layers in Torah and all the traditions and all the spiritual things, they're all one package. And they all, not only do they fit together, but they must fit together. So
I get that.
if we're not meant to blow shofar from a spiritual side, then it would have to be from a halachic side. But the wording in the halachic side follows different axioms, different things than the spiritual side. So would it be sufficient enough if someone would say, don't blow the shofar next year when Rosh Hashanah is going to be on Monday, because you don't need shofar on Monday. Monday has Monday Night Football, whatever it is. You don't need shofar. That wouldn't be sufficient, because there's like the skeleton of Jewish law, and then there's the flesh, which is the spirituality. And the Jewish law, at the end of the day, whether we have spiritual understanding or not, we follow Jewish law. What the Rebbe is very keen on doing is showing how the whole Torah is one package.
Understood?
Yeah.
Understood. But
So the
I'm not
answer
talking
is
about
it,
playing football on Monday.
so
I'm
if
saying-
there was no Jewish repercussion for it, then that would mean that there's no spiritual repercussion for it.
That, I understand that, but for the Rebbe's argument to hold water, seems to me, it should be sufficient in and of itself to not, to have a
Okay,
law.
so let me put it another way. If spiritually you shouldn't blow shofar, then the Jewish law would also be you don't blow shofar.
That,
But the Jewish law would still express itself differently. It would express itself differently.
Fine, but
So that's what's actually happening here. Spiritually and Jewish law are actually one picture. And if you read into the Jewish law, you see it's actually saying something much deeper than just being careful on Shabbos. It's saying that the fact that shofar can break Shabbos means shofar is not needed on Shabbos.
yeah, in fact, it has to be that way, that for the argument to carry the weight that he wants it to carry in this case, it must be sufficient to not blow the shofar, irrespective of what the prohibition for
Well,
carrying says or doesn't.
what I'm trying to say is if it would be the spiritual reason, spiritually, then the legal reason would be forbidden
So, for example,
in one way or another. Like, you
we're,
know,
I'm sorry, I apologize.
yeah. Well,
No, no, go ahead.
so yeah, if it's that's what you're saying is exactly what happened. Because the spiritual reason you don't blow shofar, it expressed itself in Jewish law. Also, according to the logic of Jewish law, also you don't blow shofar.
I mean, we could have an eruv, right, that would allow us to carry the shofar,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And the Rebbe has then to be arguing, notwithstanding that, even if you had
It's not the Rebbe. The rabbis in the Talmud.
you still wouldn't blow the shofar.
Correct. That's what the rabbis in the Talmud are saying. So actually, what we're saying here is must be something deeper than just carrying on a superficial level going on. If the rabbis are so strict about this, must be something deeper than just carrying on the
But
superficial.
we should discard, it seems to me that having these two arguments, the carrying argument and the spiritual argument, having the carrying argument diminishes the spiritual argument.
So what we're saying here,
If it's sufficient, I'm sorry,
what
but
we're saying here is the carrying argument is the spiritual argument. We were reading it wrong. If it was just a carrying argument superficially, then an eruv, this and that. What we're saying, the Rebbe is saying here, he's saying, no, the carrying argument that the rabbis are giving is actually the spiritual argument. It's actually one idea. One idea is the shofar breaks Shabbos. The shofar breaks Shabbos. We don't blow the shofar on Shabbos because Shabbos is sufficient without the shofar. The whole talk here is trying to say, no, these aren't two separate reasons and the rabbis found a random reason. This is the carrying argument, is the spiritual argument. That's what we're saying.
It's hard to.
We're saying read in. This is a deep concept. It's a deep concept, but you got to think about it. The carrying argument are the rabbis saying, they're really saying, they're not just saying we're worried they're carrying, they're saying the idea of worrying that you're carrying, etc., is the idea, the fact that it's a worry is because shofar isn't needed on Shabbos. If it was needed on Shabbos, then you could do it in the Eruv. It would be a mitzvah if you blow it tomorrow. So that's what we're trying to say in the Sikh here. We're trying to say the shofar idea of carrying, that idea is really the spiritual argument. It's really the spiritual idea. That's what the rabbis are actually saying. And the spiritual idea and the carrying is one idea.
And that's why I was asking, and then using multiple definitions of the word carry to lead us into mentally carrying or distracting.
You know, so in the
That's why I was
Talmud,
wondering
you
about
always do have layers actually. So carrying on Shabbos does have multifunctional layers of different ideas, spiritual ideas.
That's the only way I can see it.
But this is what the rabbis.
I understand what you're
The
saying.
this is what the Rebbe is saying. He's saying,
Okay.
He's saying in the beginning, if you go and you read just the Gemara, it seems like it's missing. It seems like it's missing something. But now that we're actually understanding how the rabbis are talking about the spiritual level, they are saying so. It's actually a beautiful realization when you see that in the Talmud. I don't know. It's actually a beautiful realization. So I want to finish up. I'll just tell you. So the Rebbe gave many different lessons from this. In this Sikha gives one, but I'll share a couple lessons. So one lesson the Rebbe said is that in this Sikha here, the Rebbe says that everybody has to have something in him, which is like the temple in Jerusalem. Something in you that you train. You're so connected to it, you do it automatically. Something in it where you don't have any calculations. Some mitzvahs that you don't have any calculation, you just do them for God without any calculation. Everyone has to have mitzvahs like that, like the temple in Jerusalem, like blowing the shofar in the temple of Jerusalem, where it's just certain aspects of life, certain moments where it's just them and God, nothing else. That's number one. Another lesson in that year, the Rebbe said that Shabbos is the holiest thing, and it removes us from the world, from the regular paths of the world. But nevertheless, Shabbos totally consumes the world. You need food for Shabbos, and it becomes totally physical. So you have to have certain mitzvahs which remove you from the world, the Rebbe said, certain things which you studying Torah, and you also have to take them and consume the world with them. That's what the Rebbe said there. He said you have to take them and consume the world on, you have to have mitzvahs which are higher than the world, like Shabbos, which also go into the world. And those holy mitzvahs, being a proud Jew in public is taking the fact that you're separate from the world. You're a Jewish person and you're in the world. And another lesson the Rebbe spoke about is that he said that Shabbos is the idea of studying Torah, represents the idea of studying Torah. And the Rebbe said that when you have a year like this, a Shabbos Dikiyar, where it starts out on Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah is the head of the year, the whole year is on Shabbos mode. Humans are born to struggle. And on a year like this year, it's your choice to struggle physically or to struggle in Torah. And the Rebbe encouraged everyone to make new commitments to studying Torah, so their struggle should be in Torah this year. And that's because that's the type of struggle a person's supposed to have on Shabbos, where they're struggling in Torah. And the Rebbe said everyone should try and dedicate that their struggle should be in Torah and not in physical things. But anyways, so this is a deep sikha, very deep sikha, but it actually is a very